At 3 a.m., a text message can feel like destiny. A memory you haven't thought about in years can walk back into the room like it pays rent there. A small embarrassment can swell into a moral failure. A person you were almost over can suddenly seem like the missing piece of your life. And the strangest part is not that these thoughts arrive, it's how convincing they feel. In the middle of the night, you don't just think differently. You become someone slightly different. Someone more fragile, more impulsive, more honest maybe, or less honest in a way that feels like honesty. Most people know this version of themselves. The one who stares at the ceiling and rewrites their entire life in the dark. The one who opens old photos, drafts reckless messages, Googles symptoms, questions relationships, imagines disasters, replays conversations from 6 years ago, and somehow turns silence into evidence. Daylight. You would never do that. Daylight you has perspective, proportion, a sense of sequence. But at 3 a.m., perspective collapses. Everything is close. Everything is personal. Everything feels final. That shift is so common that people often talk about it like a joke. Don't trust your late-night thoughts. Don't make decisions after midnight. Sleep on it. We say those things casually, like folk wisdom. But hidden inside them is a very serious observation. Consciousness is not stable. The self is not a fixed voice speaking with one level tone all day long. It changes with chemistry, light, fatigue, isolation, and time. And one of the most dramatic versions of you shows up when the rest of the world disappears. Part of this starts with timing. Human beings do not move through the day on pure willpower. We move through it on rhythms. Circadian rhythms shape sleep, hormone release, body temperature, digestion, alertness. In the brain, a master clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus helps coordinate those cycles, with light acting as one of the main signals. The body is not just awake or asleep. It is constantly sliding through states. And in the early morning hours, especially around the biological night, many people hit what sleep researchers describe as a major dip in alertness and function. That matters because if you're still awake at that hour, or if you wake up into it, you are conscious during a period your body did not design for clear judgment. The world feels still, but your nervous system is doing something more specific than resting. It is downshifting. Melatonin has been doing its work. Core systems are in nighttime mode. Your body is less interested in helping you interpret social ambiguity with grace and more interested in conserving energy, staying alive, and eventually pulling you back into sleep. Which means the version of your mind that shows up at 3 a.m. is not your daytime mind with better lighting. It is a different operating condition. And once sleep loss enters the picture, the difference gets sharper. One of the most famous findings in sleep research is that sleep deprivation makes the emotional brain more reactive while weakening the systems that help regulate that reaction. In a UC Berkeley summary of Matthew Walker's work, sleep-deprived participants showed emotional centers of the brain becoming over 60% more reactive to negative stimuli, alongside a kind of disconnect from the prefrontal regions involved in context and control. The researchers described it almost like the brain reverting to a more primitive mode. That description feels dramatic until you remember what 3 a.m. actually feels like. It does feel primitive, not in the sense of being stupid, in the sense of being stripped down, less buffered, less edited. A thought arrives and there are fewer layers between the thought and your body. Shame lands faster. Loneliness lands harder. Desire feels less negotiable. A fear that would sound exaggerated at noon can feel like a prophecy in darkness. The brakes are not completely gone. They're just softer, farther away, a little late to the scene. If you wake suddenly in the middle of the night, there is another layer on top of that. Sleep inertia. The CDC describes sleep inertia as a temporary period after waking when reaction time slows, memory worsens, and thinking, reasoning, and learning are impaired. It can last 30 to 60 minutes, sometimes longer. So if you jolt awake at 3 a.m. and instantly start interpreting your life, there's a decent chance you are doing philosophy while neurologically half underwater. That helps explain the mental distortion. It doesn't fully explain the emotional intensity. For that, you have to notice something simple about the night. It removes witnesses. During the day, your mind is constantly corrected by friction. Notifications come in, people reply. Traffic moves, coffee cools, emails pile up, a bus arrives, sunlight falls on a wall. The world keeps interrupting your private mythology. At 3 a.m., most of that disappears. There are no incoming signals strong enough to compete with your internal ones. And when the outside world goes quiet, the inside world can sound enormous. A lonely thought at noon is one thought among many. A lonely thought at 3 a.m. can feel like the atmosphere itself. That's one reason nighttime can distort scale. The room gets smaller and the mind gets bigger. A problem that belongs to one corner of your life expands until it seems to describe your whole character. This is why people don't just worry more at night. They globalize more at night. It's not, I said something awkward. It becomes, I ruin every connection I touch. It's not, I'm uncertain about this relationship. It becomes, I am fundamentally unlovable. The night doesn't merely intensify content. It changes the grammar of thought. And yet, this strange state is not entirely a modern defect. For a long stretch of human history, midnight wakefulness may have been less alien than it feels now. Historian A. Roger Ekirch's research, summarized by BBC Future, describes how many people in the pre-industrial world slept in two segments, a first sleep, then a period of wakefulness, then a second sleep. During that middle interval, people prayed, talked, checked on animals, tended the fire, reflected, sometimes even treated it as a peaceful and useful hour. That detail changes the mood of the whole subject. It suggests that being awake in the night is not automatically pathological. There may be something deeply human about briefly surfacing in darkness. The problem is that our ancestors did not wake into algorithmic temptation, glowing screens, infinite comparison, old messages, online shopping, and searchable catastrophes. They woke into dim rooms, prayer, chores, maybe a conversation, maybe silence. We wake into a machine designed to exploit exactly the kind of mind that shows up when your judgment is tired and your emotions are exposed. So the 3 a.m. self is not just biological. It is biological meeting technological. That collision is part of what some researchers now describe with a phrase that sounds almost literary: the mind after midnight. The hypothesis proposes that being awake during the biological night can tilt the brain toward negative mood, impulsivity, altered reward processing, and weaker executive control. The review connects nocturnal wakefulness with patterns seen in risky or dysregulated behavior, from substance use to overeating to more dangerous outcomes. A Stanford medicine report on late sleep timing points to the same general concern. People who stay up very late, regardless of chronotype, tend to show higher rates of mental and behavioral disorders, with researchers openly wondering whether bad decisions made in the wee hours are part of the story. You can feel that theory in ordinary life. The purchase that made perfect sense at 2:17 a.m., the text you send because silence feels unbearable, the doom-scrolling session that somehow becomes self-indictment, the snack that isn't hunger so much as anesthesia, the fantasy of deleting your entire life and starting over in another city because one bad hour made your current one feel cursed. These are not random failures of character. They are often state-dependent decisions made by a mind that is temporarily more vulnerable to intensity than proportion. And that leads to the most interesting part of this entire subject. Maybe the 3 a.m. self is not fake. Maybe it is incomplete. We tend to divide ourselves too cleanly. Rational by day, irrational by night. But human beings are not that neat. Daytime you is shaped by performance, deadlines, social cues, self-image, errands, posture, noise, and the practical demand to keep moving. Nighttime you loses much of that scaffolding, which means the thoughts that surface there are not automatically lies. Some of them are neglected truths arriving in a distorted form. The fear may be exaggerated. The loneliness may be inflated, the craving may be reckless, but underneath the exaggeration, there is often real material. A grief you have not made time to feel, a relationship you are less secure in than you admit, a body you keep pushing past its limits, a life rhythm that looks productive from the outside and hollow from the inside. Night has a way of dragging unprocessed things onto the table. It is a terrible judge, but sometimes a very good informant. That is why never trust your 3 a.m. thoughts is useful advice, but not complete advice. Some late-night thoughts should not be obeyed. That part is obvious. But they also should not be dismissed with a smirk. Because the night is often where the psyche stops being polite, it doesn't present evidence well. It overstates the case, it catastrophizes. It uses thunder when a sentence would do. Still, it may be pointing at something daylight keeps stepping around. Maybe the better rule is this: don't let your 3 a.m. self make decisions, but do let it leave notes. Write it down. Don't send it. Notice the pattern. If the same fear returns night after night, it probably deserves attention in the afternoon, not obedience in the dark. Translate the message out of the language of panic and into the language of reality. The night version of you should not run your life. It can, however, reveal where your life is running rough. Because in the end, the unsettling part is also the most human part. There is no single you moving through time untouched. There are states of you, seasons of you, chemically lit versions, socially reinforced versions, exhausted versions, defended versions, grieving versions, hopeful versions. The self is less like a statue and more like a coastline. Same land, different tide. And 3 a.m. is low tide. The water pulls back, strange things appear. Old wreckage, sharp rocks, lost objects, creatures that don't show themselves at noon. Some of it looks monstrous because it was never meant to be seen in that light. Some of it is simply true and unattended. Either way, it feels personal because it is personal. It is your mind, after all, just not your mind at its most balanced. So if you ever meet that version of yourself again, the one who turns silence into judgment and darkness into prophecy, don't mistake intensity for clarity. Don't assume that every late-night feeling is wisdom. Don't assume it's nonsense either. It is a distorted transmission from a real place. Listen gently. Record carefully. Wait for morning. Because the middle of the night does not create a new person out of nowhere. It reveals what you sound like when the world goes quiet, your body slips into its oldest programming, and the parts of you that usually keep order start speaking from farther away. And that is why, at 3 a.m., you can feel like a different person. Not because you are unreal, because you are unguarded.